The Galactic Conclave had kept peace among the stars for 12,000 years. It was a union of 847 different alien species from across the galaxy. They had built their civilization on careful rules and gentle diplomacy. The most important rule was simple: stay away from Deathworlds. Deathworlds were planets where everything wanted to kill you. Planets with earthquakes and volcanoes. Planets with storms and floods. Planets filled with predators that hunted and killed. The Conclave species had evolved on peaceful worlds with stable weather and no dangerous animals. They considered Deathworlds to be cursed places that only produced monsters. Then the humans arrived. And everything changed. Ambassador Velthrix of the Sindari Collective was one of the first to read the contact reports. He was a being made of living crystal, with 6 long appendages that could stretch and bend in any direction. His species had evolved on a world of gentle winds and soft rains. They had never known violence until they reached the stars. When Velthrix read about Earth, his crystal body shook with fear. The human homeworld was a nightmare. The ground itself moved and split open. Mountains exploded with fire. The weather changed without warning, bringing floods and droughts and terrible storms. Worst of all, the planet was filled with predators. Creatures with sharp teeth and claws that hunted other creatures for food. And the humans had evolved right in the middle of all this death. They were not just survivors. They were the apex predators of their world. They had climbed to the top of the food chain on a planet that seemed designed to kill everything on it. They breathed an atmosphere of toxic oxygen. They lived under a gravity that would crush most conclave species. They ate other living things to survive. To Velthrix and the rest of the conclave. Humans were terrifying. Commander Danny Ortiz stood on the bridge of the reconnaissance vessel, steadfast, looking out at the stars. He was a tall man in his early 40s, with short dark hair and calm brown eyes. He had spent 20 years in Earth's military before joining the newly formed Space Exploration Corps. Now he led one of humanity's first deep space missions. Beside him stood Lieutenant Commander Katie Marsh, his second in command. She was younger than Danny, with red hair tied back in a practical ponytail and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She held a tablet displaying the latest diplomatic messages from the conclave. "They're scared of us," Katie said. Her voice carried surprise and something like sadness. "They are genuinely terrified." Danny nodded slowly. He had read the same reports. The conclave had established a quarantine zone around human space. They had refused all requests for direct contact. Their diplomatic messages were polite but distant, filled with careful words that barely hid their fear. "Can you blame them?" Danny asked. "Look at where they come from. Most of these species evolved on paradise worlds. Perfect weather. No predators. Low gravity. They never had to fight for survival. They never had to hunt or be hunted." He turned to face Katie. "To them, we are basically monsters. We come from a world that should have killed us 1,000 times over. Instead, we conquered it. We became the most dangerous thing on a planet full of dangerous things." Katie set down her tablet and walked to the observation window. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant against the black emptiness of space. Somewhere out there, hundreds of alien civilizations were watching humanity with fear in their hearts. "It is not fair," she said quietly. "We are not monsters. We are just survivors." "That is exactly what scares them," Danny replied. "They do not understand survival the way we do. They have never had to fight for their lives. They have never felt real fear." The communication console beeped. Ensign Carlos Reyes, the young communications officer, looked up from his station. "Commander, we are receiving a priority message from Earth Command. It is marked urgent." Danny felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Urgent messages were never good news. "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of Admiral Patricia Vega. She was a stern woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. She commanded all human forces in the outer territories. "Commander Ortiz," she said without greeting, "we have a situation. 3 hours ago, we lost contact with the colony on Proxima Centauri 4. The last transmission was a distress call. Something attacked them." Danny's hands tightened on the console. Proxima Centauri 4 was one of humanity's first colonies outside the Sol system. Over 50,000 people lived there. What attacked them? He asked. Admiral Vega's face was grim. "We do not know. The Conclave is not talking to us. But our intelligence suggests this is something they have seen before. Something they thought was gone." She paused, and Danny saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before. Fear. "Commander, I am ordering all ships in the sector to hold position. Do not approach Proxima. Do not engage any unknown vessels. I will send more information when I have it." The screen went dark. Katie moved to Danny's side. "What do you think is happening?" Danny stared at the blank screen for a long moment. His instincts, honed by decades of military service, were screaming warnings. Whatever had attacked the colony was bad. Very bad. Bad enough to scare an admiral who had faced down pirates and terrorists without flinching. "I think," he said slowly, "that the galaxy is about to learn something important." "What is that?" Danny turned back to the observation window. The stars seemed colder now, more hostile. Somewhere out there, something ancient and terrible had woken up. Something that had made the Conclave hide behind their walls of peace and diplomacy. But Danny was human. His ancestors had faced down saber-toothed cats with nothing but rocks and sticks. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars. They had crawled out of caves and built civilizations and reached for the stars. Whatever was out there, humanity would face it the same way they had faced everything else. Not by running, not by hiding, but by standing their ground and fighting back. "I think the galaxy is about to learn that there are worse things than Deathworlders," Danny said. "And I think they are about to learn why Deathworlders exist in the first place." Katie did not answer. She did not need to. They both knew that humanity's true test was coming. All their technology, all their training, all the instincts bred into them by millions of years of survival on a hostile world. Everything was about to be put to the ultimate test. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, something ancient stirred. Something that had driven the Conclave's founders to build their peaceful union in the first place. Something that fed on fear and death and despair. It had returned, and it had no idea what it was about to face. The colony on Proxima Centauri IV had been beautiful once. Green fields stretched between small towns. Children played in parks under an alien sun. 50,000 humans had built new lives on a world far from Earth, filled with hope for the future. Now it was silent. Sergeant First Class Luis Delgado received the distress signal while running patrol exercises with his Special Forces unit. His team, Calcine Blackout, was one of the best in the entire military. They had trained for years to handle any threat. But nothing had prepared them for what they heard in that transmission. The recording lasted only 47 seconds. It began with screaming, human voices crying out in terror. Then came another sound, something that made the hair on Luce's neck stand up. It was not human. It was not like any alien species they knew. It was a sound of pure wrongness, like reality itself was being torn apart. Private First Class Amy Tran sat beside him in the transport ship, her face pale. "What the hell is that?" she whispered. Luis did not answer right away. He played the recording again, listening carefully. Behind the screaming and the strange sounds, he could hear something else. A kind of humming deep and low that seemed to press against his mind like cold fingers. "I do not know," he finally said. "But I am going to find out. Get me a line to Fleet Command." The response came faster than Luis expected. Within hours, he was standing in a secure briefing room aboard the carrier, relentless, facing Admiral Patricia Vega and a dozen other high-ranking officers. The room was dark, except for the glow of holographic displays showing maps and sensor data. "What we are dealing with is called the Void Collective," Admiral Vega said. Her voice was steady, but Luis could see tension in her shoulders. According to Conclave records, they were believed extinct for 10,000 years. They were wrong. She pressed a button, and the holographic display changed. It showed images that Luis struggled to understand. Dark shapes that seemed to shift and flow like living shadows. Ships that looked grown rather than built, covered in something that might have been skin or might have been metal. "The Void are not conquerors in any normal sense," the Admiral continued. "They do not want territory or resources. They do not take prisoners or make demands. They are harvesters. They feed on consciousness itself. They consume the minds of their victims, leaving behind empty bodies and dead worlds." A heavy silence fell over the room. Luis felt his hands clench into fists. 50,000 people on Proxima. 50,000 human minds, harvested like crops. "What is the Conclave doing about this?" asked Colonel Sandra Webb, commander of the Special Forces Division. Admiral Vega's expression turned bitter. "They are retreating. Every Conclave fleet has pulled back to their homeworlds. They are sealing their borders and hoping the Void will pass them by. They are abandoning everyone else," Luis said. It was not a question. Yes. The Admiral brought up another display showing a map of the galaxy. Red dots marked worlds that had already fallen. There were dozens of them, spreading outward like a disease. 47 worlds have been consumed in the past week. 18 Conclave species are facing complete extinction. And the Void are still advancing. She turned to face the assembled officers. "The Conclave has requested that humanity do the same. They want us to withdraw to Sol and seal our borders. They believe the Void cannot be stopped." "And what do you believe, Admiral?" Colonel Webb asked. Patricia Vega smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator showing its teeth. "I believe they have never met humans before." The next few days were chaos. Luis and his team were reassigned to Operation Fenris, a massive mobilization of every Special Forces unit in the Outer Territories. Transport ships carried soldiers and equipment across light years of space. Engineers worked around the clock to modify weapons and vehicles. Scientists studied every piece of data about the Void, searching for weaknesses. Luis found himself in a briefing room with Captain Ben Cruz, who would be leading the assault teams. Ben was a quiet man with cold blue eyes and a reputation for keeping his soldiers alive in impossible situations. "The Void feed on fear," Ben explained, pointing to diagrams on the screen. "They are empathic predators. When they attack, they project waves of pure terror into the minds of their victims. Every species they have faced has frozen up or run away. That is why they have never lost." "But we are different," Luis said. "Yes," Ben nodded slowly. "Humans evolved surrounded by predators. We developed a fight-or-flight response, but we also developed something else: rage. When a human feels fear, their body pumps out adrenaline. Their heart races. Their muscles tense. And instead of freezing, many of us get angry." He pulled up brain scans showing human neural patterns compared to Conclave species. "Look at this. When a Sindari feels fear, their higher brain functions shut down. They become paralyzed. But when a human feels fear, our brain actually becomes more active. We think faster. We react quicker. We become more dangerous." Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, one of Luz's best soldiers, laughed softly. So you're saying our ancestors were so scared all the time that we evolved to punch fear in the face? Basically, yes, Ben replied with a thin smile. The Void have never encountered prey that fights back when afraid. They have never faced predators like us. Luis thought about his grandmother, who had grown up in a poor neighborhood and faced down gang members with nothing but a baseball bat. He thought about his father, who had charged into a burning building to save strangers. He thought about every human who had ever looked at something terrifying and decided to stand their ground anyway. When do we deploy? He asked. 12 hours, Ben said. The Void are approaching the Sindari homeworld. Ambassador Velthrix has requested our help. He does not believe we can win, but he is desperate. Luis stood and checked his weapon. Around him, other soldiers were doing the same. They were scared. He could see it in their eyes, in the tension of their movements. But beneath the fear was something else. Something hard and sharp and hungry. They made a mistake, Luis said quietly. They should have left us alone. Amy looked at him. What do you mean? Luis chambered around and felt the familiar weight of the rifle in his hands. Somewhere out there, ancient horrors were consuming worlds and harvesting minds. They had ruled the darkness between stars for millions of years. They had destroyed civilizations and driven species to extinction. And now they were about to learn what happened when you threaten a species that had spent its entire existence fighting to survive. I mean, Luis said that the Void just woke up the wrong planet. The 7th Special Operations Group gathered aboard the carrier Relentless in record time. Soldiers arrived from bases scattered across human space, carried by fast transport ships that burned their engines at dangerous speeds. Nobody complained about the rough journey. They all knew what was at stake. They called themselves the Wolves. 12 teams, 300 operators, the most dangerous humans ever trained for combat. Each one had been selected for their ability to function under extreme stress. Each one had proven they could keep fighting when fear told them to stop. Luis Delgado sat in the assembly hall with his blackout team, watching as Captain Ben Cruz walked to the front of the room. The space was packed with soldiers, all of them silent and focused. The usual jokes and chatter that filled military gatherings were absent. Everyone knew this was different. All right, listen up, Ben said. His voice was calm and clear. In 6 hours, we will drop into the Sindari system. The Void fleet arrived there 2 days ago. They've already begun harvesting the outer colonies. He pressed a button and a holographic map appeared in the air above him. It showed the Sindari system with its 7 planets. Red markers indicated Void ships clustered around the 4th planet, the Sindari homeworld. The Sindari have a population of 9 billion. They have been preparing to evacuate, but their ships are slow. If the Void reach the planet before the evacuation is complete, billions will die. Maria Santos raised her hand. Sir, what about the Sindari military? Are they not defending their own world? Ben's expression was hard to read. The Sindari do not have a military. Neither do most conclave species. They have never needed one. 12,000 years of peace made them forget how to fight. A low murmur ran through the assembled soldiers. Luis shook his head slowly. He could not imagine living on a world where you never had to worry about threats. It seemed like a dream, but also like a trap. What happened when the dream ended? Our mission is simple, Ben continued. We will engage the Void fleet and buy time for the evacuation. We will board their harvester ships and shut them down from the inside. And we will show these things that humans are not prey. He paused, looking out at the sea of faces before him. I am not going to lie to you. The Void have destroyed civilizations. They have consumed species that were old when our ancestors were still learning to walk upright. Every tactical analysis says we should lose this fight. Ben smiled, and there was something fierce in his eyes. But those analyses were made by species that do not understand us. They do not know what we are. They do not know what we carry inside us. Master Sergeant Cody Flynn, a big man with a shaved head and arms covered in tattoos, spoke up from the back of the room. "And what is that, Captain?" 10 million years of evolution on a world that tried to kill us every single day, Ben replied. Every human alive today is descended from survivors. From people who looked death in the face and said no. From people who were afraid but kept fighting anyway. He stepped closer to the assembled troops. The Void feed on fear. They expect their victims to freeze or run. They have never faced a species that uses fear as fuel. They have never faced predators. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Cody Flynn stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Well then," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "Let us go show them what predators look like." A cheer went up from the soldiers. Luis felt it build in his own chest, a roar of defiance that drowned out the cold fear in his gut. Around him, his teammates were standing, raising their fists, shouting their anger at an enemy they had not even seen yet. This was what the Void did not understand. This was what made humans different. Fear did not stop them. Fear made them dangerous. 6 hours later, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sindari. System. Luis pressed his face against the viewport of the assault shuttle, watching the Void ships for the first time. They were huge, bigger than anything he had ever seen. Their surfaces were dark and shifting, covered in patterns that hurt to look at. They moved through space like living things, and where they passed, the stars seemed to dim. "Mother of God," Amy Tran whispered beside him. Luis understood her reaction. Part of his mind was screaming at him to run, to get as far away from those things as possible. But another part, the part that his ancestors had forged in caves and jungles and battlefields across Earth, was looking at those ships with different eyes. They were not impossible. They were just big. "Blackout team, prepare for insertion." Ben's voice came over the radio. "Remember your training. Remember who you are. And remember that those things have never fought anything like us." The assault shuttle banked hard, heading for the nearest Void harvester. Around them, dozens of other shuttles did the same, carrying 300 of the deadliest soldiers humanity had ever produced. On the bridge of the Relentless, Admiral Patricia Vega watched her forces engage. The Void ships turned to face the human fleet, and she felt their presence wash over her. A wave of pure terror, designed to paralyze and overwhelm. For a moment, her hands shook on the armrests of her chair. Then she straightened her spine and bared her teeth. "All ships, advance," she ordered. "Show them what we are." The human fleet surged forward, weapons blazing. The Void had expected them to freeze like every other species they had encountered. They had expected easy prey. Instead, they got wolves. On the Sindari homeworld, Ambassador Velthrix watched the battle unfold on his screens. He had requested human help out of desperation, not hope. He had expected the humans to flee like everyone else once they felt the Void's touch. What he saw instead changed everything. He believed about the universe. The humans were not running. They were attacking. Their ships were diving into the Void formation, guns firing, missiles launching. Their assault shuttles were crashing into the harvester ships, disgorging soldiers who fought with a fury that Velthrix could not comprehend. He watched a human vessel, badly damaged and trailing fire, turn directly into a Void ship and accelerate. The collision destroyed both vessels. "They are not afraid," Velthrix whispered, his crystal form trembling. "How can they not be afraid?" One of his aides, a young Sindari named Krulvix, spoke up. "Perhaps they are afraid, Ambassador. Perhaps they simply do not care." Velthrix stared at the screen as another human ship exploded, taking a Void cruiser with it. He thought about everything he had learned about humans. their violent world, their bloody history, their endless wars against each other and their environment. He had always seen these things as signs of a primitive and dangerous species. Now, he wondered if they were something else entirely. Not flaws, but strengths. Not weaknesses, but weapons. The humans were afraid. He could see it now in the way they moved, in the desperate ferocity of their attacks. But their fear did not stop them. It drove them forward. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Void were facing something they did not understand, and they were starting to lose. The battle for the Sindari homeworld lasted 18 hours. Lieutenant Diane Park led her squad through the dark corridors of a Void harvester ship. The inside was worse than the outside. The walls seemed to breathe. Strange liquids dripped from the ceiling. The air itself felt wrong, thick and heavy with something that was not quite smell, but not quite sound either. Her pulse rifle cut through the darkness with each shot, the muzzle flash lighting up horrors that she forced herself not to think about. Behind her, 6 soldiers moved in perfect formation, their training overcoming the terror that pressed against their minds like a physical weight. Contact left. Corporal Greg Wise shouted, his voice cracking. Diane spun and saw one of them. A void creature, close enough to touch. It was made of shadows and angles that did not belong in normal space. Looking at it hurt her eyes and made her stomach twist. The creature lunged, and as it moved, Diane felt its presence hit her mind. Images flooded her thoughts. Her own death, repeated 1,000 times. Her body broken and empty. Her consciousness ripped away and consumed. The absolute certainty that nothing she did mattered, that the universe was cold and uncaring, that she was small and weak and alone. For one terrible second, Diane froze. Her fingers stalled on the trigger. Her legs locked in place. The fear was so strong that it felt like she was drowning in it, like her whole body had forgotten how to move. Then something else rose up inside her. Something older than thought, older than language, older than humanity itself. Her ancestors had faced predators in the darkness of prehistoric forests. They had felt this same fear, this same certainty of death. And they had survived. Not by running, not by freezing, but by fighting back with everything they had. Diane screamed. It was not a scream of fear. It was a scream of rage, of defiance, of pure human fury. She emptied her magazine into the creature's core, watching it stumble and twist as the shots tore through its shadowy form. When the rifle clicked empty, she grabbed her combat knife and kept attacking, slashing and stabbing until the thing finally collapsed and dissolved into smoke. "That is right," she growled, her chest heaving with each breath. "We are the monsters now." Behind her, Greg was staring with wide eyes. "Lieutenant, how did you do that?" Diane ejected her empty magazine and slammed in a fresh one. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Same way our great-great-grandparents did when a tiger showed up at the cave entrance. Get angry. Stay angry. Use the fear." She keyed her radio. "All teams, remember your training. The fear is just a weapon. It does not work on us unless we let it." Across the harvester ship, similar scenes played out. Human soldiers encountered the Void's mind weapons and pushed through them. Some fell, their minds overwhelmed. But most kept fighting, turning their terror into fuel for violence. On another deck, Luis Delgado led his blackout team toward the ship's central core. According to the intelligence they had gathered, destroying the core would shut down the entire harvester. "Movement ahead," Amy Tran reported, her voice tight. Luis raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. Through his night vision goggles, he could see them. Dozens of void creatures clustered around a massive organic structure that pulsed with dark light. The core. "We need to punch through," Luis said quietly. "Maria, take point. Everyone else, follow her lead. Do not stop moving, no matter what you feel." Maria Santos checked her weapon and nodded. She was scared. Luis could see it in her eyes. But she was also smiling, a thin and dangerous expression that had nothing to do with happiness. "On three," Luis said. 1, 2, 3. They charged. The void creatures turned to face them, and the wave of terror hit like a physical blow. Luis felt his legs try to stop, felt his hands try to drop his weapon. Visions of death and despair flooded his mind, but he was human. His ancestors had hunted mammoths with wooden spears. They had crossed oceans in ships made of wood and cloth. They had walked on the moon while his grandmother watched on a black and white television. He was the product of a million generations of survivors, of fighters, of people who refused to die quietly. Lee screamed and kept running. His team screamed with him. They hit the void line like a hammer, weapons blazing, voices raised in fury and defiance. Above the planet, Admiral Patricia Vega coordinated the space battle from the Bridge of the Relentless. The holographic display showed chaos, human ships weaving through the Void Fleet, trading fire at close range. "Admiral, the Void flagship is moving toward the planet," Commander Rick Espinosa reported. "If it reaches atmosphere, it can begin harvesting directly." Patricia studied the display. The flagship was enormous, bigger than anything else in the system. It was also badly damaged, leaking energy from a dozen wounds. But it was still moving, still dangerous. "Order the 5th Assault Wing to intercept," she said. "Ma'am, the 5th Wing is down to 4 ships. They cannot stop something that size." Patricia turned to look at her second in command. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with cold fire. "They do not need to stop it. They just need to slow it down." She keyed the fleet-wide channel. "5th Wing, this is Admiral Vega. I need you to buy us 10 minutes. Can you do that?" A crackle of static, then a voice came through. It belonged to Captain Roy Martinez, a pilot who had been flying combat missions since before many of his crew were born. "Admiral, we can give you 10 minutes. Might not be much left of us afterward." "Understood, Captain. Make them pay for every second." "Yes, ma'am." 5th Wing out. Patricia watched as 4 small human ships turned toward the massive Void flagship. They were gnats attacking a giant, completely outmatched in every way that mattered. But they did not hesitate. They did not run. They attacked. For 8 minutes, the 5th Assault Wing fought like demons. They dove in close, firing at point-blank range, then pulled away before the Void could respond. When one ship was damaged, it rammed directly into the flagship's weapons systems, destroying itself and the guns together. By the time reinforcements arrived, only one ship from the 5th Wing was still flying. Captain Martinez's vessel was burning, half its crew dead, barely able to maneuver. But it was still shooting, still fighting, still refusing to die. The flagship never reached the planet. On the surface, Ambassador Velthrix watched the Void retreat. Their fleet, which had seemed so unstoppable just hours ago, was broken and fleeing. The harvesters that had landed were destroyed or captured. The fear that had paralyzed his people was fading. He stood in the ruins of his command center, surrounded by his aides, and watched human soldiers walk past. They were exhausted. Many were wounded. All of them had the distant look of people who had seen terrible things, but they were alive. And they had won. "Ambassador," a human officer said, stopping beside him. Her name patch read Park. "We have secured the area. Your people are safe." Velthrix tried to speak, but his translator could not find words for what he was feeling. Finally, he managed a simple phrase. "Thank you." Lieutenant Diane Park looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, just once, and walked away to check on her troops. Velthrix watched her go. She was young, even by human standards. She should have been in school, learning and growing, not fighting monsters in the dark. But she had come anyway. They had all come. For the first time, Velthrix understood what the Conclave had gotten so wrong about humans. They were not monsters. They were not dangerous because they enjoyed violence. They were dangerous because they would do anything to protect others. Even die. Even face their deepest fears. They were dangerous because they cared. And now, the Void knew it too. 3 months after the Battle of the Sindari homeworld, representatives from 847 species gathered in a great hall on the human colony of New Geneva. It was the largest diplomatic assembly in galactic history, and the most important Captain Ben Cruz stood in the back of the hall, wearing his dress uniform and watching the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. His soldiers had earned their place here. Many had not survived to see this day, but their sacrifice had meant something. The Treaty of New Geneva was unlike anything the Galactic Conclave had ever created. For 12,000 years, the Conclave had been built on a principle of avoiding conflict at all costs. Now, they were building something new. A military alliance. A mutual defense pact. A promise that no species would ever face the darkness alone. And at the center of it all were the humans. Admiral Patricia Vega stepped forward to sign humanity's name on the treaty. She moved slowly, her body still recovering from injuries she had suffered during the battle. But her hand was steady as she wrote. Next to her, Ambassador Velthrix signed for the Sindari. His crystal form glowed with colors that his translator identified as pride and gratitude. Other representatives followed, one by one, adding their names to the document. Danny Ortiz sat in the human delegation, watching history unfold. Beside him, Katie Marsh wiped tears from her eyes. 6 months ago, they wanted to quarantine us, Katie whispered. They thought we were too dangerous to be allowed in civilized space. Danny nodded slowly. They were right, in a way. We are dangerous. That is exactly why they need us. On the stage, the final signature was added. The hall erupted in applause, a sound that came from hundreds of different species, using hundreds of different methods to express joy and relief. Ambassador Velthrix raised his appendages, asking for silence. When the hall quieted, he spoke, his words translated into dozens of languages. For 12,000 years, the Conclave avoided Deathworlds. We believed that the violence of such places made the species there unfit for civilization. We thought that peace could only exist among those who had never known war. He paused, his crystal body shifting through colors that had no human names. We were wrong. Velthrix turned to face the human delegation. The humans came from a world of death. They evolved surrounded by predators and disasters and constant danger. They should have been destroyed 1,000 times over. Instead, they became something remarkable. He moved closer to the humans, his translator working to capture the emotion in his voice. When the void returned, we did what we had always done. We ran. We hid. We hoped that by being quiet and small, the darkness would pass us by. And it did not work. The hall was completely silent now. Every being present was listening intently. The humans did something different, Velthrix continued. They fought. Not because they were not afraid, but because they were. They took their fear, and they used it as a weapon. They showed us that survival is not about avoiding danger. It is about facing it. He raised one appendage toward the treaty document. Today, we create something new. Not a league of peaceful species hiding from the universe, but an alliance of survivors, of fighters, of people who will stand together against any threat, no matter how terrible. Velthrix's form brightened until he glowed like a small sun. Today, we stop running. And we have the Deathworlders to thank for showing us how. The applause that followed shook the walls of the great hall. Later that evening, Luis Delgado stood on the observation deck of the space station orbiting New Geneva. The planet turned slowly beneath him, blue and green and beautiful. Stars burned in the distance, cold and ancient and uncaring. Amy Tran joined him at the railing. She had a drink in her hand and a tired smile on her face. "Someday," she said. Louise nodded. "Someday." They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, the void were regrouping. Intelligence reports suggested they had retreated to the dark spaces between galaxies, licking their wounds and preparing for another assault. Maybe in a century, maybe in 1,000 years. But they would come back. "Do you think we can beat them?" Amy asked. "Really beat them, I mean. Not just drive them off, but finish them forever?" Luis considered the question. He thought about the battle for the Sindari homeworld, about the soldiers who had died fighting things that should have been impossible to fight. He thought about Lieutenant Diane Park, who had taught her entire squad to use their fear as fuel. He thought about Captain Martinez and the 5th Assault Wing, sacrificing themselves to buy a few precious minutes. "I do not know," he admitted, "but I know we will try. And I know we will not stop trying until either they are gone or we are." Amy nodded slowly. "That is what makes us different, is it not? Not that we are stronger or smarter, but that we just keep going." "Yes," Luis said. "Our ancestors figured that out a long time ago. When the world wants to kill you, you have two choices: give up or keep fighting. And we are not very good at giving up." Across the station, Danny Ortiz found himself in conversation with Admiral Vega. The celebration was winding down, diplomats and soldiers slowly filtering out of the main hall. "What happens now?" Danny asked. Patricia looked out the window at the gathered alien ships. Vessels from dozens of species, all bearing the new insignia of the Unified Defense Force. "Now we prepare. We build. We train. The void will return someday, and when they do, we need to be ready." "And the conclave species? They have never fought before. Can they learn?" Patricia smiled, and for once it was a warm expression. "They already are. Velfrix has requested human instructors for his people. A dozen other species have made similar requests. They saw what we did, and they want to understand how." She turned to face Danny directly. "We are going to teach them, Commander. Not just how to fight, but how to face their fears. How to turn terror into strength. How to look at something that wants to destroy you and say no." Danny thought about that for a moment. "We are going to make them like us." "No," Patricia replied. "We are going to help them become the best versions of themselves. Just like Earth helped us become what we are." In the darkness between galaxies, the void stirred. Their collective consciousness was troubled in ways it had never been before. They had consumed millions of species across millions of years. They had faced every form of resistance the universe could offer. And they had always won. Until now. The humans were different. When the void touched their minds with fear, they did not freeze or flee. They became angry. They became dangerous. They fought back with a ferocity that the void had never encountered. And now, the humans were teaching others to do the same, for the first time in their ancient existence. The void felt something they had never felt before. Not fear, exactly. They were too old and too vast for simple emotions. But something close to it. A cold uncertainty. A hesitation. They would return, eventually. They were patient beyond measure and hungry beyond reason. But when they did, they would be facing something new. Not the scattered, frightened species of the Conclave, but an alliance forged in fire and fear. An alliance led by the children of a death world. On New Geneva, Luis Delgado finished his drink and headed back inside. Tomorrow there would be training exercises and planning sessions and 1,000 other tasks. The work of preparing for a war that might not come for 100 years, but it would come. And when it did, humanity would be ready, not because they were not afraid, but because they had learned long ago in the caves and forests of Earth that fear was not the end. It was just the beginning. Amy fell into step beside him. Ready for tomorrow? Louise smiled. It was a tired smile, but a real one. Always. That is what we do, right? Keep moving forward, no matter what. The Deathworlder way, Amy agreed. Behind them, the stars burned cold and eternal. The universe was vast and dangerous, and full of things that wanted to destroy everything humans had built. But humans had faced destruction before. They had stared into the darkness and refused to blink, thought they would do it again, because that was what Deathworlders did. They survived. They adapted. They fought, and they never ever gave up.